Hey everybody, Noble here. I kind of ran across some, seems to be very disturbing information or situation. But hold tight, because really it's not all bad in the end. But you'll know what I mean here in a moment, a few minutes. My previous video, not a great deal of people seen it yet. I just got it out. I'm not too sure what it's up to. I was going on about how different the east coast of the U.S. seems to me, a great deal of it, and it now being all this beaches and sandbars. And somebody had said in one of the comments, and actually they went and erased it, but I think they're right. I thought that this land and sandbar area could have been created from land being pushed up from the continental shelf, creating these sandbar-like effects. But it was when I looked at this wing coming down, I believe it's part of Maryland, clearly somebody had said something about flooding, and it just wasn't fitting into what I was thinking, and I looked at it, from a little bit farther off at this particular point, and I'm like, you're right, it has to be something like that. The land sunk, or it was flooded and washed away or something, because of the shape, right? Like this coastline here it wasn't this, round out here and flat on this side. Obviously this was a whole thing and still is. But again, of course, still I don't remember it as, this big open bay area behind it. And of course the other extreme area of this being near Virginia and Georgia. But of course it runs like a great deal of the U.S. Anyhow, I was looking at this, I'm like, well, if that's not there, and if there was people there at one point, let's say, theoretically, that would certainly have an effect on the population in the region. And then, of course, the first, at the northern side of the East Coast, it was the Long Island that I see this effect starting first, to the point that it was very noticeable. So it's basically, you get this sandbar beach effect here, and a large open area behind it. And originally, kind of like I was saying, I was under the impression like this is new and this is the original coastline. I don't think that's the case anymore, as I was pointing out there with the other peninsula. It just wouldn't be right. It wouldn't look right. It just doesn't make sense. It would have all had to been land if it wasn't this big bay area existing. So I'm like, well, I wonder what the population is. And I had already gone over this 2 months ago when I started with the Mandela effect, when everybody was talking about, oh, the world population is supposed to be 9 billion, and now it's only 7. And I was thinking, no, I'm pretty sure it was 7. It was 19 trillion debt, because it went quickly, 17, 18, 19, and now it's up to 20 or more. But I had actually mentioned this in my video. So, not the world population, but when it came to the population overall, back then I had a way of remembering before I ever knew anything about Mandela, and I had used that once I had learnt the Mandela effect in the first place about 2 months ago, and I even mentioned it on my video here from 2 months back, October 23rd, and many, this was viewed by 5,000 people so far, so a few people had seen this, and I'll play this little clip for you, and then just so kind of a bit of proof here. And to show, I had looked these numbers up 2 months ago. I looked these numbers up. I still think I probably made a mistake on part of it, but I'll explain that there in a moment. So you can just take a little short listen here.
Like, I just couldn't believe it.
And then come to find out, I've come to the conclusion, I'm pretty confident that there is no great loss of life on the planet or the east coast of the U.S. It's not impossible that maybe some, I don't know, lives get swapped around, souls in different places, I don't know. But in general, the population of Canada, New York City, United States, and the world seems to be what I remember it. And I have ways of figuring that out from one number to the other. Canada and New York City comparable, New York City being approximately 10 times for the country, and the world population having some similarities to the national. So, as I mentioned there, and I looked at the numbers at the time. Unfortunately, I didn't mention the numbers here. I certainly wish I had of. But the numbers compare that the population of Canada was pretty much identical, very close to that of New York City. The population of New York City versus the rest of the whole population of the United States is about 10 times that. Now, I think originally and at this point I made a mistake. I have to assume so, and I really had looked up the number for New York, and was looking at the number for New York State as a whole and not just New York City. Although I would have swore different, but when I look at the numbers, like that can't be possible. So I must have seen just the numbers for New York. This is when it starts to get a little odd to me right now. The population of Canada, and I remember the numbers. The numbers were sort of like the 34 and the 35 kind of concept. And that's all I was looking, generally ballpark, right? And the numbers for Canada are like the 34, 35 million. The population of New York City was supposed to be the same in my mind, but I must have screwed it up. The population of New York City is 8.5 million in 2015. Clearly there's, like, how the hell could you ever get 35 million? Although I would have swore differently, right? But that mistake is bad. It's still bad, because really the population of New York State as a whole is 19.8 million. This doesn't jive. This is wrong. Something here is supposed to be around 34 or 35 million. I would have to, like I'm saying, I'd have to assume it must have been New York State as a whole is supposed to be 35 freaking million people, and it is not. I'm telling you, I looked at this 2 months ago, and the population of the United States as a whole, therefore, should be 10 times that 34, 35 number, which is about 350, 340, 350 mil. The population of the United States is running more like 20, 25, but really would be like the 20 mark. So I have a discrepancy here. Yeah. So one kind of not so bad thing is the population of the world is still at 7 billion. But that's a big number, so it's kind of hard to tell, 7 billion and what, right? 7 billion's a large digit. When you start talking about 10 million people here and there, that doesn't really show on a 7 billion digit. So I don't know for sure. And as I mentioned in that previous video, because I did hear stories around from a couple of stories around during the Mandela time in the beginning of people seem like, and I kind of just throw the stories as kind of, probably junk. I'm just going to put them aside because there wasn't a lot of them, and it was a pretty extreme thing to consider that people would have more kids than they used to have, or less kids than they used to have, or people saying, I swear I used to be somebody else, almost like a soul had been put in a different place, or maybe people swap bodies, or whatever, weird stuff like that, right? The number of kids had come up a number of times, and again, not a lot, And of course, who's really willing to come out and say this if they really thought so, right? No one's going to say that, you know. I have 3 kids and I'm only supposed to have 2, or vice versa, right? Not too many people even would ever come out and say such a thing if they thought so. But I did hear it a couple of times. So, and I had said in other videos, and I'm still under the belief that we can't just be murdered with the Mandela effect. But maybe our bodies can be, and we end up somewhere else. I certainly put that in a decent statistical possibility. But yeah, so I have a discrepancy here. The 34 and 35 number is still existing that I remember from 2 months ago, and with Canada it's still holding true. And I'm going to assume I had made the mistake, and has nothing to do with New York City, although I really would have thought so. But the population of New York as a whole is 20 million, and it's supposed to be 34 or 35 million. So we have a discrepancy here of approximately 15 million people. And on the whole population of the U.S., again, is supposed to be 340, 350. So I see a discrepancy there. Of 20 or 30 million people. Which, quite honestly, is pretty hard to fucking swallow. The problem is, I know I'm not mistaken. I can only hope that these people are really just somewhere else. Which really only makes it so much better anyway. So, what did I say with New York? 15, 20 to 30. To 30 for the whole U.S. I'm thinking it's this. This used to be all solid land. My previous video I was completely wrong in what I was thinking. That this area was created. No, this area was lost. And which makes a lot more sense when you look at it from a distance. Again, I kind of made a video there before I sat back and thought about it for a day or two, you know. I only did it within hours. As you can see what I'm saying here, it would look ridiculous just to have this really thin little bit here. It was the whole rounded piece that should have been solid land. And if you had seen my previous video, and that concept holds, or matches up, or kind of holds true with some of the evidence we were seeing in the other video. Whereas in this marshland in places, all over the place, we're getting these cutouts that are shapes that are not natural, man-made shapes here. And let's see, for example, this is showing at 330 feet. 330 there. I was doing this earlier. I was getting a lot of not 330, 130. I was getting a lot of 120s and 115s. That's a 135. This seems to be a bit wider, but it seems like when this stuff kind of gets a little mushy, so the sizes don't hold 100% the same everywhere. You know, kind of seems that way. Still 135 there. I had a bunch of 120s just before I went to do this video. 1 second there. Actually, I think it was right in here. Yeah. $127, 118. When I come in here to this kind of typical lots, I guess you could say, center of the road, to this here split of the lots is 120, 120. I mean, there it's just some homes, but when you start looking at how vast this area kind of is and how close it is to this highly dense city area, it's possible that the numbers could be in here, could have been in here. And of course, all the marsh type of shit that's showing here is generally the right size, and all marked. All of it is all that size. There's some normal shit. I don't know, there was some other shit down here. You can see it in my other video. That's all I want to say for now.